Shabbat Shalom, everyone. So today we have Parashat Shaul, which is our reading on the book of Acts, chapter 9 and chapter 10. We're going to have a very interesting and important topic today, one that comes up a lot. And in continuation with our theme this Torah cycle of teaching the quote-unquote beginner subjects, breaking them down to a very beginner level, we're going to be talking about eating kosher. And when we say kosher, we want to highlight biblical kosher, because there is such a thing as rabbinical kosher. So if you speak to rabbis or Orthodox Jews, they eat kosher, but it's rabbinical, okay? It's according to also many laws of the rabbis and their interpretation. We are more strictly biblical. Today is not a Bible study on quote-unquote biblical kosher versus rabbinical kosher. That's not the Bible study today. The question that we're answering is, should believers eat biblical kosher? Is there such a thing as you're allowed to eat, or anything that fits in your mouth is food? That's the question. Because unfortunately, I run into many people who say, no, anything's clean. You pray for it, you're good. Just put it in your mouth. If it fits, it's food. And that's how many people interpret. So let's talk about what biblical kosher is. We're going to touch four main points. The misinterpreted New Testament passages that people misinterpret in order to land on the incorrect conclusion that you're allowed to eat anything. What God says. What does God have to say about all of this? He does. He's very clear in what he says. What do Yeshua's disciples actually say that is not misinterpreted? And then finally, we'll kind of conclude and tie everything together. It's very interesting how Christianity, for example, is called Judeo-Christian for a reason, because it came from Judaism. Yet you have Judaism where people eat kosher and it's very strict, and in Christianity, nothing. There's no rules on anything you can eat. How did you go from one end to the other like that if it's Judeo-Christian? Where's the misunderstanding? And that's what we want to tackle on today, because all of the believers were Jewish. Yeshua never touched a piece of pork, guaranteed, nor did the disciples of Yeshua. So where is the misunderstanding? And that's what we're going to touch today. So I present to you the top 5, but no, you get a bonus, 6 misinterpreted New Testament passages that, because they're misinterpreted, that is how people land with the incorrect conclusion. So I have 6 of them, the top 6. Okay? And number 1, coming in at the top spot, Acts chapter 10, verse 9 through 16, in today's reading. And this is why the subject. In today's reading, what we read today, the vision of Peter when he sees the sheets with the unclean animals, is the top misinterpreted verse, what I hear the most, that makes it allowed to eat the snakes, dogs, rats, pigs, everything, because Peter saw a vision and it's allowed. Okay. Number 2, close second, Mark chapter 7. We'll read that as well. Coming in at number 3, but a close number 3, Romans chapter 14, also verse 14 and 20. In the 4th spot, 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 8. In the 5th spot, Colossians chapter 2, verse 16 and 17. And the bonus, because usually you have top 5, I'm giving you 6. The bonus, 1 Timothy 4, verse 1 through 5. You will see how all of them are misinterpreted. Clearly misinterpreted. So, let's begin. Acts chapter 10. We just read it, but I'll read again to give context, and anyone watching the video on YouTube that wasn't here for our service to read it. Let's read it. It says like this. The next day about noon, while they were still on their way and approaching the city, Kepha went up onto the roof of the house to pray. He began to feel hungry and wanted something to eat. But while they were preparing the meal, he fell into a trance, in which he saw heaven opened, and something that looked like a large sheet being lowered to the ground by its 4 corners. In it were all kinds of 4-footed animals, crawling creatures, and wild birds. Then a voice came to him, "Get up, Kepha, slaughter and eat." But Kepha said, "No, sir, absolutely not. I have never eaten food that was unclean," or tref. The voice spoke to him a second time. "Stop treating as unclean what God has made clean." This happened 3 times, and then the sheet was immediately taken back up to heaven. This is the passage most people give me. See, God said, kill and eat. Kill and eat the snake. You know what's interesting? Peter didn't listen to the vision. He didn't listen to God. He said, "No, absolutely not. I'm not going to do it." So he sees the vision again, kill and eat. He goes, "Absolutely not. I'm not going to do it." 3 times he refuses to eat. You notice it doesn't say, "And Peter killed it and ate it." And Peter ate the snake. End of story. It doesn't go that way. Peter every time refuses. He refuses God even. Why? Because he knows there's something wrong. Something's wrong here. There's no way God would be telling me to do something unclean. God does not contradict himself. So he knew something was wrong, so he rejects the vision. He does not eat the animals. Okay? Most people interpret it as he ate it or whatever. He didn't. So that's the very important thing about the vision. So how is it misinterpreted? It's read out of context. So I have the context. We have to keep reading. Say, keep reading. Keep reading. Don't stop there. You can get confused. It's actually not confusing at all. Verse 27 says, as he talked with him, this is Cornelius, the very first Gentile in the book of Acts. Before chapter 10, there is no Gentiles allowed. No one. It's only Jews. Okay? In chapter 10, we're introduced to Cornelius, the very first Gentile. This is why Kepha, Peter, did not want to go to his house. And it says like this, as he talked with him, Kepha went inside and found many people gathered. He said to them, "You are all well aware that for a man who is a Jew to have close association with someone who belongs to another people or to come visit him, it's something that just isn't done. A Jew shouldn't be here," he said. "But God has shown me not to call any person," say any person common or unclean. There you go. And that's the context. So notice that in the vision he was told stop treating as unclean what God has made clean. And then Peter says, now I get it. He's telling me, God showed me not to call people unclean that he has made clean. So he was telling him, Cornelius, although he's a Gentile, I've made him clean. So go to his house. Don't treat him as unclean. And when Peter sees Cornelius and he sees that they love God and that they got the Holy Spirit as well, then he says, oh, now I get the vision. It's not telling me to eat dogs and snakes now. It's telling me to not treat the Gentiles that God cleaned as unclean. No confusion. So Acts chapter 10 in no way, shape, or form gives permission to eat dogs or pigs or snakes or camels or anything else that God considers unclean. It's not. It's misunderstood, unfortunately. And it's the top verse. We'll go to number 2. Coming in at number 2, Mark chapter 7, verse 18 and 19. It says like this. This is Yeshua speaking. He said to them, don't you see that nothing that goes into a person from outside can make him unclean? For it doesn't go into his heart, but into his stomach, and it passes out into the latrine. Thus he declared all foods ritually clean. And this is another passage. Number 2, people say, see, Yeshua said it's not what goes into the body, right, that makes a person unclean. It's what comes out. That's what makes it. And then he made all foods clean. Okay, if you start at the end of the story, that's how you get confused. But in order to get the context of the story, we have to start reading at the beginning of the chapter. So let's go to chapter 7, beginning verse 1. It says like this. The Perushim the Pharisees had some of the Torah teachers who had come from Jerusalem gathered together with Yeshua and saw that some of his Talmidim ate with ritually unclean hands, that is, without doing netilat yadayim. Say netilat yadayim. That means washing the hands, the ritual washing the hands. And I have a picture of Jews washing their hands, and we also do it here. It's a ritual. It's a tradition. Okay? washing the hands before breaking bread. For the Perushim, and indeed all the Jews, all the Judeans, hold fast to the tradition of the elders. Do not eat unless they have given their hands a ceremonial washing. Also, when they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they have rinsed their hands up to the wrist, and they adhere to many other traditions, such as washing cups, pots, and bronze vessels. The Perushim, or the Pharisees, and the Torah teachers asked him, why don't your Talmidim, your disciples, live in accordance with the tradition, say tradition of the elders, but instead eat with ritually unclean hands? Repeat with me. Eat with ritually unclean hands. What is the context of what Yeshua says later on? Are they saying, why do your disciples eat dogs? No. Why do your disciples eat bread without washing their hands? That's the context here. So what Yeshua says is not anything you can eat. It's whether you're allowed to eat without washing your hands. That was the question. And by the way, him and his disciples did wash their hands. I will tell you what I think was happening. Yeshua loved every opportunity to tell the Pharisees how much hypocrites they were. I guarantee you that not guarantee you, I firmly believe that what he told his disciples, don't wash your hands. Just eat the bread. Said, Yeshua, why wash the hands? Just do it. And when they ate without washing their hands, obviously Yeshua knew the Pharisees were going to say something about it. And then he took the great opportunity to tell them how hypocrites they were and how they took traditions of men, like washing the hands, and elevated them above the actual commandments of God. And he exposed their hypocrisy. And he says, because look, you guys have already unclean inside. And what comes out is unclean. Who cares if you eat bread without washing your hands? Right? He was teaching them a lesson. Nothing to do with eating dogs, snakes, whatever. He didn't declare all foods clean. He declared that you're allowed to eat without washing your hands. Because it's not a commandment. Now, it was a commandment for the Kohanim, for the priests. The priests do have such a commandment. By the Second Temple period, by the time of Yeshua and his disciples, it had become a tradition for everyone to wash their hands. Not just the priests, not just the Kohanim. And so by the time of Yeshua, everyone washed their hands. It had become a tradition, and such a big tradition that it was almost law. Everyone did it for a long time already. But Yeshua was saying that's not, it's the fact that everyone does it doesn't mean it's a commandment. It's still a tradition. And it was talking about washing hands. Make sense? Nothing here about eating dogs, snakes, anything like this. All they're still unclean. That's number 2. Coming in at number 3. Romans chapter 14. I hear this one a lot. It's a close third. Romans chapter 14, verses 14. And then I'm going to jump to 20 because that's kind of how it's understood. It says like this. I know, that is, I have been persuaded by the Lord Yeshua, the Messiah, that nothing is unclean in itself. But if a person considers something unclean, then for him it is unclean. Do not, now verse 20 now, do not for the sake of food destroy the work of God. Everything is indeed clean, but it is wrong for anybody to cause someone to stumble by what he eats. And people say, see, this is what Paul said. Everything is indeed clean, right? So now pigs are clean. Is that what it's talking about? Anywhere did we mention pig? Anywhere did we mention a snake or anything like this? No. That is not mentioned. So what is the context? What does everything mean? Has anyone ever been talking to you and they say, well, everything? You go, what is everything? Explain what is everything. Right? You have to explain in context. So what does it mean? Let's start with verse 1. Let's back up and understand the context. So Romans 14 verse 1 says like this. Now, as for a person whose trust is weak or whose faith is weak, say weak. Welcome him, but do not get into arguments over opinions. Say opinions. We're not talking commandments here. We're talking opinions between people. Okay? Right away we know, red flag. It's not talking commandments. It's talking opinions between people. One person has the trust that will allow him to eat anything, while another person whose trust is weak eats only vegetables. Oh, so we have opinions between vegetarians and people who are actually eat meat. But that's what it's talking about, vegetarians. The one who eats anything must not look down on the one who abstains, and the abstainer must not pass judgment on the one who eats anything, because God has accepted him. Who are you to pass judgment on someone else's servant? It is before his own master that he will stand or fall. And the fact is that he will stand because the Lord is able to make him stand. So it's talking about there will be controversies about diets. And we still have that to this day. Have you ever been around people who say, oh, don't eat that. That's not, it's a bad diet. It's not that they're saying God said not to. They're telling you it's just not healthy. They had the same thing back then. People that ate only vegetables would tell people that eat meat not to eat it. But they were both in the synagogue. So Shaul says, don't get into arguments over opinion. The weak ones are the ones that eat only vegetables, he says. The vegetarians are the weak-minded ones. So if you eat everything and you don't eat everything, don't pass judgment on each other whether you're vegetarian or you eat meat. Nowhere here does it talk about rats, dogs, snakes, pigs. Again, it's talking about vegetables. Read it. Go to your Bible, read it. It's talking about vegetables. It's talking about vegetarians. And to this day, we have people that say, oh, I can't. I know people like this. Vegans and vegetarians, both I know. And they'll say, oh, I can't eat an animal. No, I can't. I know it was alive. I can't eat the meat. You know someone like this? Yeah, there's people that are vegan. And you know what? Vegans always tell you they're vegan. They're very proud they're vegan, right? They're like, oh, I'm vegan. I don't eat any animal products, not even milk. I eat almond milk, right? And they look at you like, oh, you're not vegan? Okay, this is what he's talking about. So if you have a vegan in here, he's the one with the weak faith, right? Don't get into arguments over opinions, he said. Okay, later on he says, because everything is clean. In meat that is allowed. You know why? Some people have told me, well, why doesn't it say I can eat the rat? It doesn't say rat. Because it's obvious. Anyone who's read the Bible, which at the time was only the New Testament, there was Old Testament, the Tanakh, there was no New Testament, it was obvious that you didn't eat those things. If you told one of them that, hey, you know you can't eat pork, they would look at you, where are you from? Of course you can't eat pork. It was just obvious. Some people wanted to say explicit, but they forget that the people that wrote it were Jews, which is obvious to a Jew you don't eat pork or dogs or any other unclean animals. So there, the context, vegetarians versus carnivores, or people that eat all kinds, omnivores, I guess would be technically better. Okay, number 4, 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 8. It says like this, food will not improve our relationship with God. We will be neither poorer if we abstain nor richer if we eat. And people say, yeah, see, look, food is not even that big of a deal. We shouldn't really even be talking about if I eat the pig, whatever. It doesn't going to make me closer to God or far away from God. That's how people interpret Corinthians 8:8. But is this what Paul is saying? Well, let's go back to verse 4 and start with context. It says like this. So, as for eating food sacrificed to idols, say eating food sacrificed to idols. That is the context of chapter 8. Eating food sacrificed to idols. He says, we know that, as you say, an idol has no real existence in the world, and there is only one God. For even if there are so-called gods, either in heaven or on earth, as in fact there are gods and lords galore. Yet for us there is one God, the Father, from whom all things come and for whom we exist, and one Lord, Yeshua the Messiah, through whom we're created all things, and through whom we have our being. So then when he says about food, we will be richer nor poorer, it is talking about food being sacrificed to idols. And notice that in the time of Shaul, all food was sacrificed to idols, especially in the Gentile nations. And so the believers, that's all the meat they had, and they go, well, we don't sell it. I mean, we don't honor those gods. We know they're nothing. And she goes, yeah, you know they're nothing. So just eat it with a clear conscience. You know that the God is nothing anyway. But it's not talking about pig. It's talking about a cow that was sacrificed. So the cow's kosher. It just happened to be sacrificed to an idol. So they would say, is it kosher to eat or not? Some believers said, no, we're not. And some would say, the idol's fake, as long as it's a cow. But they wouldn't eat it if it was a sacrificed monkey, because it's not kosher. The cow is. And that was a controversy. Are you allowed to eat a cow sacrificed to an idol? And I'll give a little bit more on that topic later on. It's going to come up again. Coming in at number 5, we have Colossians chapter 2, verse 16 and 17. It says like this: so don't let anyone pass judgment on you in connection with eating or drinking, or in regard to a Jewish festival, or to Rosh Chodesh or Shabbat, new moon or Sabbath. These are a shadow of the things that are coming, but the body is of the Messiah. And this is what people say, well, don't judge me on what I eat or drink, and I won't a Jew. Let's not judge each other. No one judge anyone on food or drink. So if I eat the rat, don't judge me. That's what Paul is saying. Is that what Paul is saying? Let's continue reading. The context here is, if you keep reading, becomes clear. So let's go to verse 18. It says, don't let anyone deny you the prize by insisting that you engage in self-mortification. Say self-mortification. And angel worship. This is some weird things he's talking about. Self-mortification. These are people who practice abstinence, like, you know, the Catholics do it, the Lent, right? They're like, ooh, I'm going to give up this thing. That's going to get me closer to God. This is what he's talking about. Things like this. If you practice self-mortification, it's going to get you closer to God somehow. Okay. Eating, drinking, things like that. Okay. Angel worship. We don't do that now, but they did back then. Such people are always going on about some vision they had, and they vainly puff themselves up by their worldly outlook. They fail to hold to the head, from whom the whole body, receiving supply and being held together by its joints and ligaments, grows as God makes it grow. If, along with the Messiah, you died, repeat with me, you died to the elemental spirits of the world, the elemental spirits of the world, then why, as if you still belong to the world, are you letting yourselves be bothered by its rules? Did it talking here about Torah? Commandments of God? No, elemental spirits of the world. Don't touch this. Don't eat that. Don't handle the other. Such prohibitions are concerned with things meant to perish by being used, not by being avoided. And they are based, repeat with me, they are based on man-made rules and teachings. Man-made rules. Has nothing to do with Torah. Does it say commandments of God? No. It's saying man-made rules and teachings. They do indeed have the outward appearance of wisdom with their self-imposed religious observances, false humility and asceticism, but they have no value at all in restraining people from indulging in their own nature. What is he talking about in Colossians? That there are man-made rules. Here is the deal. In the Gentile nations like Colossae, people had traditions of the area. And they said, oh, we don't need this because of this. We don't drink this because of that. It's kind of our own cultural thing among the Gentiles. And Paul says, don't let anyone judge you about eating or drinking, eating kosher, or not following their rules, man-made rules and teachings. It's not talking about Jews in Judea that keep Torah. It's talking about Colossians that still have man-made rules and teachings of their culture. Notice it doesn't say laws of God. It says man-made rules and teachings. Read it in context. So when he says don't let anyone pass judgment, that's the point. Don't let anyone amongst the Colossians. So for example, if you want to apply it to your life today, let's just say you go to your cousin Tim. You go to your cousin Tim's house and he goes, hey, look, eat a hot dog. And you go, no, I can't eat that. I need kosher. Oh, come on, you're better than us now. We eat hot dogs here. That's a tradition of us. We're goyim. Well, I'm not a goyim anymore. That's what he's talking about. Don't let them pass judgment on you that you now eat kosher on how you eat and drink. And they still follow their man-made rules and their traditions and things like that. Read it right there. I put it in red for a reason. Verse 22. Man-made rules. It's not talking about them keeping Torah rules. It's their rules. It was a problem with the Colossians. That's why he wrote it in the letter to the Colossians. Okay? And the bonus snuck into the list in 6th place, 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 1 through 5. It says, the Spirit expressly states that in the Acharit Yamim, in the end days, some people will apostatize from the faith by paying attention to deceiving spirits and teachings taught by demons. Such teachings come from the hypocrisy of liars whose own consciences have been burned as if with a red-hot branding iron. They forbid marriage and require abstinence from foods which God created. Pay attention, foods which God created. That's key. To be eaten with thanksgiving by those who have come to trust and to know the truth. For everything created by God is good, and nothing received with thanksgiving needs to be rejected, because the word of God and prayer make it holy. And so people have told me this, right? Come on, it's pig, but as long as I pray for it, God makes it holy. Just pray for it. That's what 1 Timothy says, really. So you can take a snake, pray for it, it's all good. Would that apply to anything else? Before I steal something, Adonai, please forgive me for stealing this thing, and take it. Is that okay now? Does that apply to anything else, that you pray for it and it makes it okay? No. Why would it apply to food? To unclean things. So the key there is when he qualifies the statement by saying foods which God created. So all foods that God created, received with thanksgiving, are made holy, assuming they're foods, because some animals God doesn't consider food. But there's some that he does consider food, and I'm going to explain that next. So I'm going to explain how God considers what things he considers food, okay, or what he considers food. So what does God say? So we just covered I think the top 6 misinterpreted verses, and I believe I explained pretty clearly why they're misinterpreted and taken out of context. So if someone says, well, what does the Bible actually say? What does God actually say on the topic? Well, great question. Let's talk about that. And we'll begin in Genesis chapter 7, verse 1 and 2. It says like this: Adonai said to Noah, come into the ark, you and all your household, for I have seen that you alone in this generation are righteous before me. Of every clean animal, say clean animal, you are to take 7 couples. And of the animals that are not clean, say not clean, 1 couple. So we see that from the beginning of time, it has been known that God created some animals for food, the clean ones, and some animals not for food, the unclean ones. And this happened way back with Noah. This is why the clean ones was 7 pairs. So 7 male sheep, 7 female sheep. 7 bulls, 7 cows. Only 1 crocodile male, 1 crocodile female, because they're unclean. Only 1 dog, only 1 female dog, because they're unclean. But of the clean ones, 7 pairs. Okay? And in the Hebrew, I put the Hebrew here because it's important. I'm introducing some very critical terminology. It says like this: Michol habehema hatahora. Say tahora. That's what means clean. Tahor or tahora. Okay, it says tikach lecha shiv'a. You shall take 7. Shiva ish ve'ishto. 7 men and its female. Umin habehema asher lo tahora. Say lo tahora. And amongst the animals not clean. Lo means no. Lo tahora. He shnaim. That you take 2, a pair. Shnaim. Ish ve'ishto, the pair of a male and female. So it's very clear. But the concept of tahor, of clean animal that is for food, is way back in the days of Noah. Before the Torah. Way before the Torah. Before Abraham. Right? So we see that this was already a known fact. Okay? So going a little bit further, we'll now go into the book of Leviticus, chapter 11, verse 46 and 47. It says like this: Such then is the law concerning animals, flying creatures, all living creatures that move about in the water, and all creatures that swarm on the ground. Its purpose is to distinguish between the unclean, say unclean, and the clean, and between the creatures that may be eaten and those that may not be eaten. Is there any way to misunderstand this? Those that may be eaten and those that may not be eaten. God was very clear what is food and what is not food. And when we read it, In context, verse 44 is key. 2 verses before that, it says, "For I am Adonai your God. Therefore consecrate yourself and be holy." Say, be holy. "For I am holy, and do not defile yourselves with any kind of swarming creature that moves along the ground." So what he's saying is, you have to be holy because I, you got him holy. So don't eat nasty animals. Don't eat unclean animals that take away your holiness, because you have to be holy because I am holy. That's what he's talking about in Leviticus 11. That unclean animals take away your holiness. And you shouldn't do that because you have to be holy. Okay? So in the Hebrew, it says like this. Lehavdil, to separate. Be'in hatameh, between the, now a new term, tameh, unclean. Be'in hatameh, the unclean, ube'in hatahor, and the clean. The tameh is the unclean, tahor is the clean. Ube'in hachaya hane'echelet. So repeat with me. Hane'echelet. Then you can eat. To distinguish between the lives or the creatures that you can eat, uvein chachaya asher lo ta'achel, and those creatures that you may not eat. So we see that tahor, the clean, you can eat, and the tameh, you cannot eat. Can that be misinterpreted? It cannot be misinterpreted. God even gives you the list. Read it in Leviticus 11. He tells you, the cow, kosher, he says. The sheep, kosher. The goat, kosher. The deer, kosher. He gives you exactly which animals cannot be misunderstood because God is very clear. And he says very clearly, and these animals do not eat. I'll even tell you, he says. So there's no confusion. He gives you a long list. But most people skip the book of Leviticus. They think it's boring. Oh, come on. What are all these animals? Yeah, they're the ones you're not supposed to eat. That's why Adonai goes through the trouble of telling Moshe to write them down. So it's clear. Okay. Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 3 through 8. It says like this. You are not to eat anything disgusting. Say disgusting. By the way, I don't like that translation. I'm using the Complete Jewish Bible because it should be abomination, abominable. Although abomination is disgusting, but I like the word abomination better. The animals which you may eat are the ox, the sheep, the goat, the deer, the gazelle, the roebuck, the ibex, the antelope, the oryx, and the mountain sheep. Very clear. Any animal that has a separate hoof and that is completely divided and also chews the cud, these animals you may eat. Very clear. If it has a split hoof, if it chews the cud, and if it's a cow, sheep, goat, deer, gazelle, very clear which animals are considered food. Verse 7, but you are not to eat those that only chew the cud or only have a divided hoof. For example, the camel. No, cannot eat the camel. If you want to eat a camel, you can't. It's not kosher. The hare, rabbits, the coney are unclean for you because they chew the cud but don't have a separate hoof. While the pig, say the pig, is unclean for you because although it has a separate hoof, it doesn't chew the cud. You are not to eat meat from these or even touch their carcasses. Hate to tell you, but if you see the bacon in the store, you can't even touch it. It's a piece of its carcass. Not only can you not eat the bacon, you can't even touch the bacon. It's a sin to touch the bacon. Okay. So I have verse 3 in Hebrew. That's the top Hebrew. It says like this. Repeat with me so you get some Hebrew exercises here. It's lo tochal kol to'eva. To'eva. To'eva means abominable. Very important, that word to'eva. Why is it important? Because if we go to now Leviticus 18, verse 22, it says like this. You are not to go to bed with a man as with a woman. It is an abomination. What is it talking about? Not to go to bed with a man as with a woman. Homosexuality. It's talking about homosexuality. And if we read it in the Hebrew, it says like this. Ve'ed zachar, and with a male, zachar means male, and with a male, lo tiskav, and with a male you should not lay. Mishkeve isha, as you lay with a woman. To'evahi, it is an abomination. Okay? So, interesting. To'eva is disgusting to God. Okay? Things that are to'eva, that God considers level to'eva, disgusting, abominable, is eating the pig and homosexuality. They're in the same level. So, what's interesting is the reason why I bring this example is because it gets most people thinking. Some people will say, they're eating their bacon, you pray for the bacon is fine. Just pray for it and eat it. Don't think about it. Could the homosexuals do that? Well, that's an abomination, but as long as we pray, it's fine to be homosexual. Would that work? It wouldn't. But they're both an abomination. So why some people, and if I tell this to people, they go, no, you can't pray for that. Come on. Homosexuals are going to hell. All of them. Every single one. It's same level as the bacon eater then. Both abomination. It's just that one we're used to doing, we think is fine, and the other, you don't. But God considers them both an abomination. To'eva. Okay, that Hebrew word to'eva, it's right there in red. What is the context? Unclean things that remove your holiness are an abomination to God. So things that are unclean that take away your holiness as the people of God, that's what is an abominable to God. Okay? Isaiah 66, verses 16 through 17. It says like this. And then we'll jump to verse 22 and 24. It says, for Adonai will judge. This is in the end times, talking end times. For Adonai will judge all humanity with fire and with the sword, and those slain by Adonai will be many. Those who consecrate and purify themselves in order to enter the gardens. It's talking idol worship. Then follow the one who was already there, eating pig meat. Look at that. In the end, when Adonai, in the end times, and he's judging these people, he clearly calls them out, eating the pig meat. You don't believe me? There, go read in your Bible, Isaiah 66. Reptiles and mice, basically eating unclean animals, will all be destroyed. Say destroyed. Together. Whoa, can you really believe the Bible says that people that eat pig will be destroyed forever? It's right there. Any version you want to read it in. Verse 22. For just as the new heavens and the new earth that I am making will continue in my presence, says Adonai, so will your descendants and your name continue. Every month on Rosh Chodesh, the new moon, and every week on Shabbat, the day of rest, every living will come to worship in my presence, says Adonai. As they leave, they will look on the corpses. Say, look on the corpses of the people who rebelled against me. For their worm will never die, and their fire will never be quenched, but they will be abhorrent to all humanity. So pay attention. Isaiah 66 is saying that all who rebelled against God by idolatry, by eating pig and snakes and mice, rats, they will all be destroyed because they rebelled against God. And a mark of the rebellious that will be destroyed in the end times is because they eat whatever they want. They worship whatever they want, including themselves. They're their own idol. Right? They have pride. I don't need God. It's all about me. Right? People that have pride, they will be destroyed. But interesting, it also says those who eat the pig. Why? Because you tell them, God said not to. Come on, it's all clean. No, they're being rebellious. It's like when you have a son. If you ever had a son, God forbid, that does drugs or whatever, you tell them, don't do that, it's bad for you. No, it's not. I feel the same. They always make it seem like it's not a big deal, although you know it's bad. And the same thing for the eating pig. Right? In the end times, God calls them the rebellious because they don't want to follow his rules that he says not to eat. But again, sadly, too many people have the mentality of, if it fits in my mouth, it's food. Let's go. And that's not the case. Right? The holy people of God have rules. So, what do the disciples actually say when they're actually talking about food? Not already misinterpreted. I already said what is misinterpreted of the disciples. Now let's read the passage where they're actually talking about food. And that's coming later in the book of Acts, in chapter 15, verse 19 through 21. The context here is, what do we do with the Gentiles? There's a lot of Gentiles who live like pagans. They eat whatever, they practice fornication, they do a lot of these bad things because they're pagans, but they're believing in Yeshua. How do we even get them started to keeping Torah? They're way far from Torah. Their holiness is really low, but yet they've accepted Yeshua as part of the new covenant. They're entering into the new covenant. What do we do with them? This was the question. The Jews, the Jewish believers, were like, I don't know. How do we even get them started? So, this is what they say. Therefore, James, Yaakov, who was the leading disciple, therefore, my opinion is that we should not put obstacles in the way of the Goyim who are turning to God. Instead, we should write them a letter telling them to abstain from things polluted by idols, not eating things sacrificed to idols, from fornication, from what is strangled, and from blood, eating these things. For from the earliest times, Moshe has had in every city those who proclaim him, with his words being read in the synagogues every Shabbat. What do we do every Shabbat? We read the Torah. We read the law of Moses, quote unquote, the law that Moses wrote. The law of God given through Moses. That's what we read every synagogue. So they're saying, well, to let them into the synagogue, just let them not bring to share nasty things. Don't let them bring pigs and stuff like that. They can't. So, because when they go to the synagogue every Shabbat, they're going to hear the law of Moses. They're going to hear the Torah. Remember, there's New Testament here. There's no New Testament yet. They go to the synagogue, all they hear is the Torah. So he goes, every week, they're going to read the Torah. They're going to hear the Torah being read. They're going to learn. But let's just tell them to not eat things polluted by idols, not to eat strangled, not to eat blood, to abstain from doing the fornication to the idols, which is part of the temple worship of the idols. And then in the synagogue, they'll learn more Torah, is what he's saying. They'll learn as they go. So, these things that they tell the new believers to follow, did they just come up with them? To abstain from things polluted by idols, or from strangled, or from blood? No, none of them they invented. They're all in the Torah. And I put the references there. So, polluted by idols, that's in Exodus 34. At least, I just put one. I could give you more. Exodus 34, verse 13 to 15. Not eating strangled, that's in Leviticus 17, 15. And not eating blood is in Genesis 9, Leviticus 17, and Deuteronomy 12. All in the Torah. So the Goyim, the Gentiles, were told to follow those things written in the Torah as a starting point for starters. Right? You know, all of us here at the synagogue, we bring food to eat and we share. Imagine someone brings a big old ham leg, puts it in the middle. We'll kick them out. Right? Take out the ham leg, please. We know it's unclean. It's an abomination. And this is what they're telling them. They're going to come to the synagogue to read Torah every week, it says, right? It says every week, every Shabbat, they're going to go to the synagogue and read the Torah. Let's just get them started. Don't eat the nasty things. Right? So let's go read those. Meat sacrificed to idols. It says, rather, you are to demolish their altars, smash their standing stones, and cut down their sacred poles, because you are not to bow down to any other God, since Adonai, whose very name is jealous, is a jealous God. Do not make a covenant with the people living in the land. Do not make a covenant with the people living in the land. It will cause you to go astray after their gods and sacrifice to their gods. Then they will invite you to join them in eating their sacrifices. So the children of Israel are taught, do not go to the sacrifices. You cannot partake. For example, let me give you an example. It's more practical. Let's say your son comes, Mom, the neighbor down the street, I have, they're my friend. I have one of their kids is my friend. They're celebrating one of their gods. It's a big holiday for them. And they killed a bunch of goats, which is a kosher animal. Can I go with them? Allowed or not allowed? According to Torah. Your kid keeps Torah. Not allowed. Because he's going to go and join in a festival for a pagan god. And he cannot eat that. That would be a sin. Because later on he's going to come. He's going to come with big old dreads, right? And a tie-dye shirt. What happened to you, son? I believe in the Rastafarian now. My neighbor convinced me. You let me go to their holidays all the time And while there, I heard it and it made sense. I'm not keeping Torah anymore. The Rastafarian will provide. Or whatever, right? This is what God says not to do. Because you go to their parties, you go eat their food. Hey, this is cool. I want to be one of you guys. He says, don't do that. Okay, so you're not allowed to eat sacrificed of the sacrifices to idols. But so if you remember 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 8, Paul says, come on, if they sacrifice to idols, you know it's nothing, eat it. What's the difference? Is there a contradiction? So here's the context. The Torah prohibits worshiping idols and participating in idol worship by eating the sacrificed meat. In the time of Shaul, all meat in Gentile nations was dedicated to an idol. Shaul teaches that it was permitted to eat the meat so long as you knew the idol was nothing and you weren't participating in worshiping it. So in other words, if you're at the party, you can't eat it. You're celebrating with them. But what would happen in Corinth is they were so pagan, every butcher said, I'm dedicating this one to this God. And they would kill it, eat the cow. So some believers said, he said it's to the God, I'm not eating it. And others would say, the God is nothing, we know that. And we're not there worshiping the God. We're just going to the butcher shop to buy the meat. And that's the line that Shaul draws. Don't go worship the idol, but it's all the meat you have in Corinth. You want to eat a steak every now and then, just know that the idol is nothing and you're fine. Just don't go there worshiping the idol. That's the big problem. And so that's the line that he draws. Okay? Not allowed to worship the idol, but if you buy the meat at the butcher shop, Baruch Hashem Adonai now, it's easy to go buy it. Right? But in those times, in Judea, it was easy. In Israel, it was easy. But in Corinth, everyone was pagan everywhere. Everywhere you look, it was only paganism. So they had that problem in Corinth. So Paul has to give them a little bit of room. Okay, in Judea they wouldn't. But in Corinth, he gives them a little bit of room that the idol is nothing. And that's how he interprets Corinthians 8. But he never tells them, go worship with them. Okay, not allowed. Leviticus chapter 17, verse 15. This is the prohibition from eating strangled. It says, anyone eating an animal that dies naturally, say dies naturally, or is torn to death by wild animals, whether he is a citizen or a foreigner, is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. Then he will be clean. Look, the dies naturally or torn is a very good attempt, but poor, at explaining what the Torah here is saying, but it's really hard. In the Hebrew, I have it in Hebrew, it says like this. V'chol nefesh, you could repeat with me, get some practice. V'chol nefesh, asher tochal nevela utrefa. So let's stop right there. The two Hebrew words for dying naturally and torn to death that it says is nevela and trefa. There is a whole book, the tractate in the Talmud, called Chulin. It's this thick and it talks about nevela and trefa. What is trefa? What is nevela? It's a huge concept. And that's not today's Bible study. But the translators say, well, how do we translate nevela? I don't know. We can't put the whole book. Just put torn. Right? Or just died naturally. Basically, boil it down to one word, although it has a lot of, to explain nevela is a whole book, and to explain trefa is a whole book, pretty much. But we're going to boil it down to this. They did not die being bled out appropriately. And we'll explain that. So, the word, here's the context. The word strangled in Acts 15, they're told not to eat strangled, attempts to capture the concept of trefa and nevela, prohibited in the Torah. Both terms refer to an animal that died without its lifeblood being drained, and therefore the meat still contains the nefesh, the soul of the animal. We are not allowed to eat the soul of the animals. So trefa and nevela is the Torah concepts that the Jews understood. Yeshua, Peter, Yaakov, James, the one writing in Acts 15, they understand what trefa and nevela are. But our translation says strangled. So when someone reads it that doesn't understand Hebrew, doesn't understand trefa and nevela, they're like, I can't eat strangled. So you're telling me that if I grab a sheep and put it in a chokehold and go until it goes and then it turns purple and dies, like, okay, I can't eat that one because I strangled it. Is that what it means? No, that's not what it means. They try to put a word. How do you translate this Jewish concept of trefa? How do you translate trefa? Well, strangled. And so some people think, do you put it in a stranglehold? And then that's what it means. Who chokes out animals? No one does. So it's not that back then, you think back then the Goyim were choking, they were, riding the cow until it finally died, strangled? That's not what it's talking about. So people get confused, and it's understandably, it's a 100% Hebrew context. I mean, Hebrew meaning and interpretation, trefa. So they say strangled, but what it means is an animal that was not bled out is considered strangled. So if you ask, and we'll just get to the point, the meat you go buy, you go to Food Max, you go to, Vallarta, or whatever, it's not kosher. Walmart, right? Anywhere else. If it's not kosher, here in the United States, unfortunately, they kill animals by shooting them in the head, either with a bullet or with a bolt gun that just stabs them in the head. That's considered strangled. That's considered trefa. Because the animal was not bled out, you killed his brain. So if there's a coroner and they do, the cause of death of this animal was brain dead because he got shot in the head. It was not bled out like the Bible says to. So therefore it's considered trefa. And the Torah says not to eat it in Leviticus 17. And in the New Testament, it also says not to eat it because you're not supposed to eat the strangled. So both the Old Testament and the New Testament say you can't eat the meat from Costco. I'm sorry. Both testaments say it. If it's been strangled, meaning if it's trefa, right? If it's kosher, it's fine. It was bled out. If you kill it yourself, you slit the throat good. You know what you're doing. You have to know what you're doing. It's allowed because you bled it out. Okay? So that's what strangled means. And by the way, if believers that read and believe Acts, the book of Acts, it's very clear. The only thing, again, when they read strangled, believers, I understand someone just gave his life to Yeshua. They just came to the church. You think they're going to understand trefa and nevela? They're going to understand this Hebrew context? No. They're just going to be told, eat anything, and they're going to believe. And when they read strangled, they're just going to assume that someone put her in a chokehold, right? Till it turned blue and died. Okay. It's a lot more than that. You have to understand the Bible to really understand what it's talking about. Okay, let's talk about blood. It also said not to eat blood. That's Genesis chapter 9, verse 3. Let's start there. It says, every moving thing that lives will be food for you, just as I gave you green plants before, so now I give you everything. Only flesh with its life, say life, which is its blood, say blood, you are not to eat. Okay, so when Noah came out of the ark with the animals, he says, okay, I gave you everything to eat. By the way, it's not everything. We already said there's clean and unclean, right? We already established this. Noah knew clean and unclean. So he's saying all of the clean animals you can eat. Only don't eat the blood. All the way from the days of Noah, we know not to eat the blood. Okay, Leviticus chapter 17, verse 13 and 14. It says, when someone from the community of Israel or a foreigner living with you hunts and catches game, whether animal or bird, that may be eaten. Say may be eaten. Okay, so if they catch a snake, may not be eaten. It's not talking about this. It's talking about deer that may be eaten. He is to pour out its blood and cover it with earth. For the life of every creature, its blood is its life. Therefore I said to the people of Israel, you are not to eat the blood of any creature, because the life of every creature is its blood. Whoever eats it will be cut off. What does it mean? It means that the lifeblood of an animal is what contains the soul. Is what contains the life of the animal. And it literally says soul. So there, I have it in Hebrew, I believe it's Leviticus 17:14. It says, Ki nefesh kol basar Okay? For the soul of all flesh, damo nafshohu. Its blood, its soul is. Or its blood is its soul. What does it mean? Okay, so if you have an animal, it's a beautiful animal, it's alive, and you come and slit his throat, what's going to happen to it? He's going to bleed out and he's going to die. It was perfectly fine till you slit his throat. So the blood comes out in the life. So the life comes out in the blood. Now, what the Kohanim would do, the priest would collect, as the animal's dying and it's bleeding out, they would collect that blood in a bucket and they would go and touch the altar and they would do certain things with it, depending on what the sacrifice was. Because it had the soul. And they were sacrificing soul for a soul, the soul of the person for the sacrificed animal. It would cover the sins of the person. Okay? That's what the lifeblood was for. So we are told we cannot eat that lifeblood. We cannot eat that blood. Okay? That's the soul of the animal. And Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 16 says, however, you may slaughter and eat meat wherever you live and wherever you want, in keeping with the degree to which Adonai your God has blessed you. The unclean and the clean may eat it. So the unclean or clean person, a person in a clean or unclean state can eat an animal that is not meant for sacrifice. Don't get confused with clean and unclean, because people can be clean and unclean. The clean person or the unclean person may eat it as if it were a gazelle or deer. But don't eat the blood. Say, don't eat the blood. Pour it out on the ground like water. So the commandment is that when you kill an animal and the blood comes out, the life is in it, the soul is in it, you have to bury it in the ground. The life has to go back to the ground. If it's not going to be used as a sacrifice, you have to bury the blood. And then that's kosher to eat. That's part of the animal being kosher, is you buried the blood. You followed the process that God gave for you to be able to eat that animal. No shortcuts, right? You have to follow these steps in order to be able to eat animals, because they're alive and they have souls too. In order to eat it, we have to make sure the soul is gone. God created all things. Those are the rules He made. We can't make them up. It's just what He did. You don't like it? Complain to God. Right? He's the one that gave these rules on how we are allowed to eat animals. We can't just make things up. Okay, so I explained why the disciples were told not to eat food sacrificed to idols, not to eat strangled or trefa and nevela, right? And not to eat blood. And by the way, you know there's people that eat blood? In a lot of cultures to this day, they take that blood when the animal dies and they cook with it. They make dishes with it. Did you know that? They make sausages with it and all kinds of other things. Don't eat it. Not allowed. That would be a sin because you're eating the soul. So let's go back to our very first question, the way we started this Bible study. Should believers eat biblical kosher? Should believers in Yeshua, you're at the church right now, should you be eating biblical kosher? Absolutely. Right? Absolutely. Any attempt to misinterpret the scriptures or innocently believing that, Romans 14, Mark 7, I explained it, or the sheet of the animals. All of those are out of context. Never, people expected to say, and do not eat the pig. No, because that was obvious. Right? It's so obvious, it's not written. And if you start reading the Bible in Genesis, it also becomes obvious to you and me and everyone else who reads it that, oh, okay, I get it. God considers these animals. God made all animals. Some were food, some were not. Okay, got it. Right? Okay, so here are the kind of 4 points that I have on what biblical kosher would be. Again, I would have to follow up with another Bible study to get deeper into these. But in this Bible study, we determined these 4 things. God made many animals, but only tahor, clean ones, are food. Everything else is not food. A dog is not food, right? A weenie dog, you look at it, I could eat the weenie dog. No, not food. It's unclean, right? You cannot eat a golden doodle steak, right? There's no, and some people eat it. Some people it's normal to eat dogs. There's places in the world where a dog is normal. But if they believe in Yeshua, they have to stop eating the dog. There's places in the world where eating snakes and rats. Some places in the world they raise rats for food, right? Some people eat pig. Can you believe that? They put bacon in the burgers. Ugh. And they sell them as, they even advertise, we have a special, a triple bacon. And people go, oh, they got a triple bacon this month. I got to go. The bacon's my favorite part. Right? Yeah, some people do that. Okay. Second point. You cannot eat meat from strangled animals that were not drained of their soul, contained in the lifeblood. So if an animal was strangled, sadly, I know it's on sale, Food Max $2.99 a pound. But if it was shot in the head, it's strangled. Not allowed. Okay? It's trefa. Third point, you are not allowed to eat the lifeblood of an animal as it contains the soul. If you like to eat the blood, by the way, once the blood comes out and the animal dies, that's the lifeblood. When you cut a steak, a T-bone, ribeye, porterhouse, whatever you prefer, it has a little bit of blood in it. That's not the lifeblood. That's just the leftover blood in the muscle. They will always be there. Even if you cook it till it's black, it got caked on there. The lifeblood is what came out when the animal died. We're not allowed to eat that blood. That was used for sacrifices. Only sacrifices. That's all it's allowed because it has the soul in it. So blood products we can't eat. Okay? And finally, you are not allowed to attend parties worshiping idols and eating meat dedicated to them. So if your neighbor, very good person, you love them to death because they're so cool person, they invite you, hey, look, it's a big holiday for our God. Come, we're going to have all kinds of meat. But don't worry, it's a cow. You go, oh, it's a cow? Then yeah, I'm in. Not allowed. Not allowed because it was dedicated. You know you're going to this celebration of an idol, and God says not to participate in idol worshiping celebrations. And sometimes, what if I go outreach? Right? I'm eating the tacos, but I'm preaching to them. No, it's still not allowed. So don't eat. You can go outreach them, but you cannot partake of the idol worshiping going on by eating the meal. Okay, that's prohibited in the Torah. So there you go. These are the main points about eating biblical kosher. Amen. We're going to end here. Shabbat shalom.